Hello again, football fans. This is Anthony coming back at you with Two Fat Guys Fantasy Football. Today we're going to be continuing our series of off-season team breakdowns, and today we are going to be looking at the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are an incredibly interesting team to me right now. Um, a lot of things have happened, and a lot of things have yet to happen. So I'm kind of curious to see how it all ends up working out. But as always, let's jump right into it and take a look at what this roster looked like at the end of the season last year. So, as we know, at the end of the season last year, they were playing with Lamar Jackson being out. So Tyler Huntley was the starting quarterback, and ironically enough, made the Pro Bowl as the Ravens starting quarterback. Definitely not a Pro Bowl worthy performance from him, but nonetheless. So this is a roster that, because of the injury, I think underperformed quite a bit off of the expectations from last year. So, but there was kind of more to it than that. This is a roster that dealt with some running back injuries as well. The wide receiver group has never come together the way they really wanted it to. So it's been heavily reliant on Lamar Jackson making magic happen and Mark Andrews being incredibly dominant. Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews are two absolute superstars in the league, but this year even Andrews dealt with an injury. Um, I'm really curious to see what ends up happening with Lamar Jackson. As it stands currently, I am proceeding assuming that he is going to continue to be a Raven moving forward. But he's an incredibly talented player and an incredibly unique player in the NFL. He is a very good passer. The metrics do show that, but he's an absolute electric runner. So it's interesting to see how the Ravens adjust as potentially some of the running ability starts to fade from his game to see how they can try to develop more of just a pure passing game around him. But he is a great passer as well. Unfortunately, they haven't done a great job of surrounding him with a lot of weapons. One guy that I do like a lot is Rashad Bateman. Again, Bateman has been injury prone in his early NFL career and hasn't been able to develop the way that everyone hoped. But coming out of Minnesota, he was a very highly rated receiver, and I think he definitely has what it takes to be a wide receiver one in the NFL and a wide receiver one when it comes to fantasy. So definitely somebody to keep an eye on for fantasy fans. The rest of the receiver core is a bunch of guys I'm not really all that interested in. Devin Duvernay is a great speed guy, but doesn't have a whole lot in his route tree. Not somebody that I'm really interested in for fantasy, but he is a good field stretcher for purely NFL purposes. Sammy Watkins was brought in last year to try to be the pure wide receiver too, and just it didn't really work out. He didn't have a very good season at all. In the running back room, I do actually like the running back room um, if if everybody can stay healthy. J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State from a few years ago is a really good runner. He is one of those guys that can kind of do it all. He's got good speed, uh, fairly elusive, doesn't shy away from taking the hits, but unfortunately he hasn't really had a fully healthy season yet to show what he's capable of. But the pairing with him and Gus Edwards is a very good one. Gus Edwards complements him very well. Is a good, strong kind of a power back or real between the tackles kind of runner. Um, gets the tough yards, and as a running back room, it is a quality running back room for the NFL to have. And then Kenyon Drake was brought in later last year due to injury, and actually played pretty well for them as their third option at running back. But he played some quality time for them. But it is a good running back room, a group that I like a fair bit uh, as an NFL group for fantasy. I want more Dobbins than I do Edwards, but that's subject to change as well. Tight ends. Mark Andrews is uh, an incredible talent at tight end. Arguably the second best tight end in the league, behind Travis Kelsey. I think he is the second best tight end in the league behind Travis Kelsey. He's a guy. He's got good speed. Uh, an amazing has amazing hands. Great blocker. He does everything really well, and isn't afraid of any route on the field. He does whatever is asked of him. He's just a great overall tight end, and definitely uh, the second tight end, or possibly third tight end if you believe in Kyle Pitts, that I would be looking at in fantasy. But for me, he's tight end two behind Kelsey. Um, so, but yeah, definitely a guy worth having. They're also, I think, going to run more two tight end sets because Isaiah Likely is a guy that I loved in last year's draft, but didn't really love the landing spot. Isaiah Likely, if he was on a team that needed a pure tight, a tight end, he he could be a monster, but he's going to be buried behind Mark Andrews for a while. So he's going to see less action than he probably should. But he's a guy that brings immense upside to the position, and a guy that I do like a fair bit, especially in kind of dynasty leagues that you can hold him and kind of wait for Andrews to change. The offensive line has been solid. They've really built this team through the trenches. Kevin Zeitler, Ronnie Stanley, Morgan Moses, Ben Powers was one of the best guards. They did draft Tyler Linderbaum last year, the best center in last year's draft, and he played really well. I expect him. He was one of my favorite and one of my highest rated offensive linemen coming into the draft last year. Overall, I think he's a quality kind of 10 plus year starter at center in the NFL, and he showed that he was well on his way to being that last year for them. So it's an offensive line that I really liked quite a bit. I think it's one of the top tier groups in the NFL. So on offense, it is an offense that I do like, a lot of the pieces around it, but it all comes down to essentially Jackson and Andrews as the two main pieces here. On defense, this is a team that has looked really good for a very long time. Now we're starting to get some age on some of the pieces. We're starting to have to move some things around a little bit. But starting on the defensive line, Calais Campbell was a guy that just brings immense strength, toughness, one of the best character guys you're going to see in the NFL. And still, after all these years, an incredibly solid defensive lineman. Eats up double teams, does give you some pass rush, uh, but is that strong at the point of attack. Is a guy that I like quite a bit as the 3-4 end. In the middle, Michael Pierce has been a really solid nose tackle for several years now. Incredibly strong at the point of attack. Eats up all the double teams that you need him on the inside to free up the linebacker group. Uh, Definitely is kind of a great anchor for that D line and for the defense as a whole. Um, the other end, Matabuke is a guy that um, hasn't developed as much as I think they'd hoped in his first few years, but he's a guy that does have a lot of potential. Um, but as we're getting further into his career, I think we've seen what he is. If he can make a leap, that's amazing. But he's a solid end, probably going to end up being a rotational end, but not not a superstar or somebody that you're going to have to really game plan around. But definitely is a solid guy to have. The linebackers are kind of the strength of this defense right now. They made a trade for Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. Roquan Smith is, you could make the argument as the best middle linebacker in the league. Incredible speed, incredible tackler, great at the point of attack, great in coverage, does bring plenty of pass rush ability as well out of the position. More of a coverage linebacker than a pass rush, but he can really do it all on the field. Uh, they did give up a fair bit to get him, second round pick, and then made him one of the highest paid. If I think he is actually the highest paid middle linebacker that's um, in the NFL, if not one of the highest. But uh, we'll see if it ends up working out for him. But after making the trade for him and giving up the pick, they had to sign him long term. You couldn't just pay that for a 1 year rental. Um, Patrick Queen is a guy that we're still waiting to see full development from, but again, he's a guy that gives you a ton of ability, a ton of speed. He is a willing tackler and a good tackler. Um, Still needs to develop a little bit more in coverage. Doesn't bring a ton in pass rush ability, more of a coverage linebacker and run stopping linebacker, but definitely has plenty of talent and plenty of potential. As our pass rushers, we have a lot of veteran leadership in Justin Houston and Jason Pierre-Paul, and we've got some youth in Odafe Owe and one of the steals of the draft, David Ojabo. David Ojabo, coming out of Michigan last year, would have been a mid first round pick, probably at the latest, were it not for an injury suffered through the pre-draft process, and so he slipped, and the Ravens jumped on him. He's a guy that I like a lot. He one of my favorite pass rushers coming out last year. I think he will be um, after a redshirt year. I think we're going to see a lot from him this year, and I think he's going to be eager to prove what he has and how good he really is. So he's a guy to keep an eye on as a breakout candidate in second year. We also have Odafe Owe, who has showed us quite a bit of development as well. Incredible speed off of the edge. Needs to develop a little bit more in his skill set as a rusher, but definitely is getting better through the course of his young career. Tyus Bowser is another guy who has been around for a few years now. He's kind of in the middle of his career, so he's a veteran. We know what he is at this point, but he is very serviceable as a pass rusher, and brings a lot to the table. Is just a good. He sets the edge well. Doesn't give you anything in coverage. Is definitely just kind of a run stopping, pass rushing outside linebacker. In the secondary, this is another spot where the rich kind of keep getting richer. Chuck Clark uh, has been the starter here. They did draft Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame last year as well to be the future at the safety position. And he showed flashes of being a very good talent last year. He had some miscues as well, but that's you're going to have that with any rookie. But some of the flashes that he showed, some of his good plays were really really good. So I think the future is bright for him at safety. Um, on the other side, we have Marcus Williams, who not a whole lot to say. He is a very good free safety. Has had a good career to this point. Is one of those guys that fits the bill as a guy who is rarely out of position, kind of always seems to make the right play. He's good in coverage. He is a pretty good ball hawk. He's just a good, really good free safety to have, and a guy I like a fair bit back there. So it's a good safety group for them. Corners led by Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and Kendall Fuller, or I'm sorry, Kyle Fuller. Forgot which twin it was, but yeah, it's a good group. When Kyle Fuller is your slot corner, you know you're doing something right. It's a good cornerback group that they match up well with just about anybody, and they really make this defense fairly formidable. A guy that I like a little bit that I want to talk about that didn't get a ton of buzz was Travis Jones. Travis Jones was drafted last year as well out of UConn. He was drafted to be the nose tackle of the future, and he is a guy that I like a lot. I think he's going to be kind of underrated for a while because he is kind of buried behind Pierce. But he is a guy who's incredibly strong at the point of attack, has showed the ability to add to that frame and add to that skill set. He's a guy that I really want to see how his development tree has improved from year one to year two with a full season in the NFL offseason strength and conditioning program. He's a guy that I think we could see make a real impact for this team moving forward. But all in all, this is a roster that is absolutely built to compete. It all, like I said, comes down to the health of Lamar Jackson and what he can bring to the table for you. The team goes as he goes. So on paper, I like it a fair bit, and I think they're going to be competitive for several years to come. But let's take a look and see what has happened to this team through the course of the off-season program. Um, so quite a bit has happened. The biggest thing on offense, at least, was the signing of Odell Beckham Jr. To be that big name wide receiver to fix that wide receiver group. They also brought in Nelson Aguilar and Andy Isabella to add a speed threat. So the way I kind of see this wide receiver room shaking around, I see uh, Bateman and Beckman as Beckham as the two outside receivers, Aguilar working in the slot, and Duvernay and Isabella being the deep threats. Our third wide receiver is no longer Kenyon Drake. It is Justice Hill, who is completely serviceable in this role. But it's still a running back room that I like a fair bit. We lost Ben Powers in free agency, but we brought in Patrick McCarry to fill that hole, and I think he's going to be uh, at the very least serviceable in this role. It's still an offensive line that I like a fair bit. Another guy that they drafted last year that I'm curious to see how he develops is the absolute monster Daniel Falalele. Um, is an incredibly large lineman, good strength. He's a guy that uh, could develop or could not develop. It'll be interesting to see. The tight end room is still likely in Andrews. So on offense I think got better. Like I said, Macari is a little bit of a downgrade from Powers, but not enough to for me to really knock it. And the addition of Odell Beckham Jr. Makes this team even a little bit scarier on offense. So it's an offense that I like a fair bit. On defense, we let Jason Pierre-Paul and Justin Houston go to free agency, um, which is fine. Tyus Bowser is going to slot over. Odafe Owe slotted in currently as the starter. I think David Ojabo ends up taking that role from one of them. I'm curious to see how it all plays out through camp and the early season. Our middle linebackers are still Roquan and Patrick Queen. Starting strong safety, Clark was traded away, so Kyle Hamilton steps into that role. Marcus Williams still on the other side. The cornerback room has taken a little bit of a hit. Marlon Humphrey is still there. He's still, that lockdown, shutdown corner. Um, so he's where it all starts. But after that, we lost a lot of our depth. So Trayvon Mullen Jr. is quarterback two. He's a young guy with good speed. Coverage is okay, but not great. Has shown signs of kind of starting to put it all together. I think the change of scenery and putting him with Harbaugh can help that. I think it's a good landing spot. I think he can develop into a good cornerback too. And then Daryl Worley as our third corner is not ideal. Definitely not ideal. Uh, but this is a spot where, luckily, corner is fairly deep in the draft. So it's definitely a spot that they could address. The rest of the defense maintains intact. Um, so On paper, the defense got a little bit worse. The offense got a little bit better. So it's kind of a wash for me. It's a roster that through the course of the offseason has stayed pretty even. And I'll still say, as long as Lamar Jackson's there as the starting quarterback, I think that the roster has stayed fairly competitive. Um, so they're definitely capable of winning double-digit games for you, and competing for the playoffs at the very least. So let's kind of jump ahead and take a look at some potential draft options and draft ideas for the Ravens. The Ravens are an interesting team for me. I do not like trying to mock draft to the Ravens, because they're a team that perennially just seems to draft best player available, and they're set up to do that again. So whoever the best player on their board is going to be who they end up drafting, um, and that could be any position, any player. I don't think they pigeonhole themselves into saying, well, we have to take the best cornerback or we have to take the best lineman. They're just going to take the best player. I think there will be some value there potentially at the defensive back position. Deontay Banks could be a guy that they look at that spot. Another guy, Brian Branch, could be another guy they take a look at that spot. So we've got a couple of potential options there. But for the Ravens, I'm a little bit more focused about what they might do uh, kind of later in the draft, because they're another team that's usually pretty good at getting talent in the middle rounds. They're a team that I think attacks the running back position in the middle rounds. There's a lot of names here that you could look at. It's an incredibly deep class, and one of my favorites isn't even really listed here. But a few names that you could look at. Dwayne McBride is a name that I like a fair bit for them. He's a running back that the more have looked at, the more I've kind of liked what I've seen from him. He's a guy that gives you uh, full foot kind of three down kind of potential. He brings a little bit in the passing game. He's also a good kind of between the uh, the tackles as well. He's a guy that is really kind of a do it all, and you're going to get somebody's going to get a very good value in him. Two other guys that I like a lot, kind of along that same line, Roshan Johnson and Chase Brown. Um, Two guys that I like for different reasons. Roshan is a guy that was buried behind Bijan Robinson, so we didn't get to see much of him. So he has a couple things going for him. He has a lot of tread left on the tires, and what you did see from him on tape, he kind of jumped out at you. At least he jumps out at me. Chase Brown, on the other hand, was incredibly productive at Illinois, so he would come in and I think be able to push for a spot. Kendre Miller out of TCU is another interesting name, but a guy that's not really listed here. Um, Izzy Abanikanda is a guy that I will forever butcher his name, and I wish he was on here. So, but he's not. Um, Whoever made this roster didn't really know much about him, because a lot of people didn't know much about him when this draft class was put out. But he's a guy that I hadn't watched much of until after his pro day. Once I saw his pro day, I had to go back and rewatch the tape to see if the numbers that he was putting up uh, matched, and they do. Um, for me, he doesn't quite make it into my day two rankings. He still falls into this day kind of this early day three with McBride, Brown, Johnson. Um, all of these guys are right in that spot. I think all of them could go early day three. It's just a matter of what flavor running back that you like. Um, they're another team, as the Ravens are another team that could look at wide receiver in the middle rounds. And I think there's a lot of middle round talent here as well. Um, Marvin Mims is a guy that I think should go earlier than that. Xavier Hutchinson, Tyler Scott, Jaden Reed, all guys that I like quite a bit. Trey Palmer is a guy I've started to warm up to. Um, these are all names that could definitely add to that wide receiver room and push for some playing time. It's a team that hasn't been able to get early wide receivers right, so um, take a couple shots late and see if you can find one. Um, we've hit a lot of the lineman positions on both sides of the ball, but yeah, the Ravens are a team that I think definitely addresses the offense, but I think they do it in the middle rounds, and I think they do it at running back. I don't think they're sold anymore on either Dobbins or Edwards, so I'd like to see them take a chance there. But first round, like I said, it's really hard to predict. They're going to take the best player available, um, and for me, guy that I like them taking a lot in kind of the early third round would be Izzy. So that's going to do it for me and the breakdown of the Ravens here. So, as always, uh, we will be revisiting our team breakdowns once the NFL draft concludes and we get that third and fourth round of veteran free agency shakeout after the draft. So we'll be taking a look at this and looking at some potential fantasy forecasting for the teams once that happens. We will be getting through a team breakdown for every single team in the NFL before the start of the NFL draft. But as always, if there's any feedback that you have for me, any comments, a player that you like for the Ravens that I didn't touch on, or a strategy that you think they'll employ that I brushed over, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to interact there. Any feedback is always appreciated as well. But for me, that's going to do it. Until next time, have a good night.